Hello, friends. Once again, thank you for being here. I want to say this right at the outset. Authors often imagine that they're a power unto themselves, and that's absolute nonsense. An author without readers is just an empty voice crying in the wilderness. It's our readers who make us powerful and make change in the world. I owe everything to you guys. Thank you for reading me. Thank you for the support. So, is the House of History built on foundations of sand? I'll just recapitulate a couple of points we made yesterday. Are we a species with amnesia? And there are those pyramids of Teotihuacan again, and the small one in the far distance is the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl is his emblem, his style was as a feathered or a plumed serpent. This is when you see an image of a plumed serpent in Mexico, that's Quetzalcoatl. And it's interesting, although he's very much associated with the Aztecs, he goes back much, much further than the Aztecs. Here amongst, we see the not Aztec actually, the Teotihuacan image of the feathered serpent about 2,000 years ago on the left. But on the right, from the Olmec site of La Venta in the Yucatan, we see another image of Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent. You can see the plume on his head. And that piece is at least 3,200 years old. And it may be significantly older than that because we can't date stone. And the Olmec sites were so damaged and ruined in the 20th century and the 19th century that it's difficult to be sure, but it's at least 3,200 years old. So we know this notion of the civilizing hero, Quetzalcoatl, goes back and back into time. Now, this is the site of La Venta where that plumed serpent figure on the right was found. Unfortunately, the site itself has been completely destroyed by the oil industry. It's been taken over for petrochemicals. They absolutely destroyed everything. Some archaeology was done on it before the destruction. That's a plan of how the site used to look, this 3,000-plus-year-old site. And associated with it and found there are these astonishing, very large megalithic heads, which are generally known as Olmec heads. And they have a very distinct appearance. Some people think that they look like Africans, and some people think that they look like Polynesians. What they don't look a whole lot like is the indigenous peoples of the Yucatan today. So there's an Olmec head on the left, and there on the right, again from La Venta, curiously, again undateable, but at least 3,200 years old, we see the figure of a bearded man. I mean, he's very definitely and distinctly bearded, and looks like a sort of mysterious stranger, as does the figure on the left. In the center is the statue of the pharaoh Khafra from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. But left and right of that are figures from the Olmec sites. Actually, these are from the Olmec site of San Lorenzo. I just can't help noticing the similarity of the headdress and the sphinx-like pose also of these some of these Olmec figures. You know, what's going on here? Why do we see these curious similarities? Is it just a coincidence, or is there some hidden connection? Both Osiris in Egypt, Osiris was a civilizing hero, and Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, appeared amongst humanity after a great cataclysm at the dawn of a new age of the earth, and both were described as bringers and renewers of civilization. The Mexican traditions are quite hard to date exactly, but in Egypt there's more to work with. And if you asked any ancient Egyptian where all their knowledge and science came from, they said it came down from the time of the gods, from Zep Tepi, from the first time. And the clues to unlock an actual date for Zep Tepi can be derived from astronomy, and particularly from a very hard-to-observe phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. It's a phenomenon that would be almost impossible to observe in a single lifetime. You need multiple lifetimes. You need record keeping to note what's going on in the sky. What it is really is it's particularly noticeable in two areas. It's noticeable in the constellations of the zodiac, which all lie on the path of the sun, and it's notable in the pole star. Presently, our pole star is Polaris, but it wasn't always Polaris. Go back 4,000 years, and it was Thuban in the constellation of Draco. That's because there's this wobble on the axis of the Earth. And I hope the diagram is making it clear why the pole star changes. We can see the extended pole making this great circle in the heavens. But what it also changes is the constellation that houses the sun on the spring equinox, when the sun rises directly due east. And at the moment, the constellation housing the sun on the spring equinox is the constellation of Pisces. We live in the age of Pisces, but we've all heard the song. We live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and indeed we do. There are arguments about exactly when the age of Aquarius begins, when Aquarius fully locks into position behind the sun. But within the next 150 years or so, we will be in the age of Aquarius, a new age, and hopefully a better one. So this is a process that operates at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. That's the rate of change, and that's why you need more than a single lifetime to really note it. And the change is very, very slow. It takes 2,160 years for the sun to pass entirely through any one of the constellations of the zodiac. And Hamlet's Mill, this is a book that I would just highly recommend to anybody who really wants to get their head bent out of shape. It is an astonishing work of scholarship. It really was a fundamental book for me when I came to write Fingerprints of the Gods. I don't believe I could have written Fingerprints of the Gods without Hamlet's Mill. And it was written by two professors of the history of science. Giorgio de Santillana was professor of the history of science at MIT. So no pseudoscientist, this guy. This is a very major academic. And Hertha von Deschend was professor of the history of science at the University of Frankfurt. And they discovered evidence of a worldwide knowledge of precession of the equinoxes encoded in myth. And they concluded that this knowledge was part of a global heritage of a lost civilization, to which all subsequent civilizations in all parts of the globe, forgetful of the source of the precious legacy they received, are the, quote, ungrateful heirs. And here are some of the examples from myth that they draw on. For example, those 72 conspirators who were involved in the murder of Osiris in Valhalla. 500 doors and 40 there are, I ween, in Valhalla's walls. 800 fighters through each door fair, went to war with the wolf they go. Well, 540 times 800 is 43,200. It's one of those processional numbers. 72 is the heartbeat of the system. Half of 72 is 36. Add 36 to 72, you get 108. Half 108, you get 54, or 540, or 5,400. It's a sequence of numbers that are all based on the number 72. They're all found in mythology. They're all found in a notion of a whirling, churning object, which is why they call the book Hamlet's Mill. 10,800 is the number of stanzas in the Rig Veda. That's the number 108. 72 plus 36 is 108. Multiplied, you get 10,800. 432,000 is the number of syllables in the Rig Veda. And this information just goes back thousands of years before the Greek astronomers who are supposed to have discovered it. And Santillana and von Deschend, and I'm quoting them, trace the origins of the system to some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization of prehistoric antiquity that first dared to understand the world as created according to number, measure, and weight. They point out that the system is expressed in architecture as well as in myth. The Angkor complex in Cambodia is just an absolutely stunning place. Santha and I had the opportunity to go there first in 1997 while the country was still deeply in troubles, and we had the whole complex to ourselves. It was an amazing experience. And as they rightly point out on this bridge to Angkor Thom, there are 108 statues, 54 on each side, precessional numbers. What about the Great Pyramid of Giza? You take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, and you get exactly the polar radius of the Earth, from the center of the Earth to its pole. And you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by the same number, 43,200, and guess what you get? The equatorial circumference of the Earth. It's a scale model of the Earth on a scale of 1 to 43,200. Now, if that number was 57,823 or 62,480, it would be random, but it's not. It's 43,200, and that's a precessional number. That's a number that's found in all those myths all around the world, and it's used as the scale here. So they're giving us the dimensions of our planet on a scale defined by a key motion of the planet itself. In my view, that is really, really clever. An incredibly brilliant thing to do. And it's telling us that there was knowledge of the Earth, precise knowledge at the time that the Great Pyramid was created. And it's telling us there was precise knowledge of precession of the equinoxes then. And it's deploying the two together. Precession can be used to fix the date at which a structure was built. It does that actually in the Hoover Dam. Quite deliberately. There's a star map built into the floor of the Hoover Dam. And Oscar Hansen, the artist, believed, quote, that in remote ages to come, intelligent people with knowledge of precession would be able to discern the astronomical time of the dam's dedication. They froze the skies over the dam at the time it was built. And, you know, if you want to pass information down to a distant future, you'd be unwise to commit it to paper. And indeed, you'd be unwise to commit it to any written language, because you can't be sure that people 8 or 10,000 years from now will ever be able to read your language, just like we can't read the language of the Indus Valley civilization today. What you want is a universal language, which anybody with a knowledge of astronomy will be able to decode. And that's what precession offers. That's what Oscar Hansen used in the Hoover Dam. And that is what is used, as I will show you, in the pyramids. And again, I need to pay tribute to my great friend and colleague, Robert Bauval, the originator of the Orion correlation theory. Now, Robert's arch opponent is Ed Krupp, who's the director of the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. Ed Krupp accepts that, according to the pyramid text, the pharaoh rose to the stars of Orion. Egyptian astronomy recognized Orion, at least his belt, as the celestial incarnation of Osiris. I mistyped that, as the celestial incarnation of Osiris. But Ed Krupp doesn't like Robert Bauval's Orion correlation, suggesting that those belt stars define the pattern of the pyramid, especially as we go back in time and find that the best definition is more than 12,000 years ago. He actually hates that idea. And he's done everything possible to scuttle it and to persuade the public that there's no merit to the Orion correlation. Specifically, he's argued that the Orion correlation is upside down. Let's address that argument here. You see the line rising up from the pyramid, from the Great Pyramid to the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. And then you see the second pyramid, and you see the third pyramid, Menkaura. Now, in the sky, the star that represents Menkaura is the northernmost star. The sky is a dome over our head, so the higher star is closer to the pole, and the lower star is further. It's the northernmost star, and the pyramid of Menkaura is the southernmost of the 3 pyramids. You can see Ed Krupp's argument as to why it might be upside down, and the pyramid of Giza is the northernmost of the 3 pyramids, but the southernmost of the 3 stars. But this is a very pedantic argument, because this is an art project that we're looking at Giza. So let's look at it from the point of view of a painter. And the painter is going to depict those 3 stars of Orion's belt. And after depicting them on his easel, he's going to place the painting down on the ground. And when you do that, you get the exact correlation of the 3 stars of the belt and the 3 great pyramids of Giza. I think it's a nonsense, it's a diversion to suggest that it's upside down. As a work of art, this faithfully reproduces what is seen in the sky and brings it down to earth. As above, so below. Those shafts in the Great Pyramid all point at key stars. And they point at stars in the pharaonic period. They point at stars in the period of 2500 BC. I do not wish to take the pyramids away entirely from the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians undoubtedly were massively involved in the completion and construction of those pyramids. But the base platforms were laid out long before, in my view. And what the pyramids do by means of those shafts is they use astronomy to lock the pyramid to the date of the pharaohs, to the 4th dynasty, about 2500 BC. But in their pattern on the ground, they do something completely different. And this again is because of precession, and it concerns not only the pyramids, but also the Great Sphinx. That wobble on the axis of Earth. It's roughly between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago that the Sphinx gazes at its own celestial counterpart, the constellation of Leo, rising at dawn on the spring equinox. And as I showed you yesterday, let the sun rise a little higher, and there you have the belt stars of Orion in exactly the pattern of the 3 great pyramids of the ground. Now, I'm not saying that whoever created the Giza complex actually put the river Nile there. I'm saying that this is one of the reasons why this place was chosen to create these structures, because the river Nile faithfully mimics the Milky Way. And we know that the Milky Way was the great river that ran through the Duat, the ancient Egyptian afterlife kingdom. So actually what we're looking at here is a representation of the Duat on the ground. And this will be the only reading I do today, but there's a pyramid text that tells us about this. It tells us exactly why the ancient Egyptians would wish to make this. Whoever shall make an exact, it refers to a place called the hidden circle of the Duat. We all know the Duat is the underworld afterlife kingdom. And it states, whoever shall make an exact copy of these forms and shall know it, shall be a spirit, well equipped, both in heaven and earth, unfailingly and regularly and eternally. In other words, if you want that unfailing and regular and eternal life, it's a good idea to make an exact copy on the ground of the region of the sky called the Duat. And that's what we see here. And it's the sky not of 2500 BC, but the sky of the epoch from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. So these monuments, incredibly clever, are doing 2 things. Using astronomy, they're locking the pyramids to the epoch of 2500 BC, 4,500 years ago. And again, using astronomy and the ground pattern of the pyramids and the whole complex, including the Sphinx, they're locking to the sky of 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. They're telling us that these monuments belong to both periods, not just to one of them. And is there anything else apart from the astronomy? And I agree, it's hard to wrap your hand around the astronomy. Is there anything else apart from the astronomy that supports the notion that some of the complexes at Giza are much older than 2500 BC? Like the Sphinx, and like the Sphinx temple directly in front of its paws, and like the Valley temple a little bit to the southeast of the Sphinx. Are they much older? Is there evidence that they're much older? Egyptologists used to be honest about this. Here's Salim Hassan, a great Egyptologist. As to the exact age of the Sphinx and to whom we should attribute its erection, no definite facts are known. And we have not one single contemporary inscription to enlighten us on this point. You wouldn't hear that from a modern Egyptologist. They'll just tell you, look, the Sphinx was built by Khafre. That's the fact. If you disagree, you could just bugger off. That's how Egyptologists feel. Amenhotep II, limestone stela, speaks of the pyramid of Horem Akhet, which, says Salim Hassan, perhaps shows that he considers the Sphinx to be older than the pyramids. And Thutmose IV, it's his famous dream stela. That's the stela between the paws of the Sphinx. It records a dream that Thutmose IV had in the shadow of the Sphinx. This is the single object that Egyptologists used to say the Sphinx was created by Khafre. And the basis for that is a single syllable. The rest of it is missing, and that single syllable is kaf on a line that is otherwise wiped out. They say, oh, that means Khafre made the Sphinx. It may well refer to Khafre, but it could equally well be saying that Khafre restored the Sphinx rather than simply made it. And we know the Sphinx went through many episodes of restoration. So I think Egyptologists are being slightly economical with the truth when they tell us that the Sphinx is definitely the creation of Khafre. It rests on a single syllable, on a stela that is not contemporaneous with the Sphinx, and even that syllable is now gone. There's another stela at Giza, which Egyptologists prefer to ignore entirely. It's called the inventory stela. And what it does is it refers to a much older origin of the Sphinx. Egyptologists have dismissed this. Live Horus, the Metzer, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khufu, given life. He found the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, by the side of the cavity of the Sphinx on the northwest of the house of Osiris, lord of Rostau. The plans of the image of Horemakhet were brought in order to bring to revision the sayings of the disposition of the image. He restored the statue, all covered in painting. He restored the Sphinx. House of Osiris, lord of Rostau. Cavity of the Sphinx lies to its northwest. Therefore, House of Osiris, lord of Rostau, lies to the southeast of the Sphinx. The only structure that fits that description, those coordinates, is the Vali temple. And as with the references to the Sphinx itself, the testimony of the inventory stela is that the Vali temple was not made by Khafre, since it was already in existence in the time of his predecessor, Khufu. Why do Egyptologists just dismiss all of this and lock into it, to tell us it's as though it's an absolute established fact that the Sphinx dates to 2500 BC? Can't they just be a little bit more generous and a little bit more open and consider that there are other options? I don't get it. I don't understand why archaeology works that way. And there are other options. And what I'm showing here is the Great Sphinx and the cavity in which it stands. And top left, the late, great John Anthony West, dear friend of mine, passed away in 2018. And on the right, Professor Robert Schoch of Boston University. John West felt there was something really wrong with the dating of the Sphinx. And he was the first person to really get into investigating this. And he felt that the Sphinx showed signs of water weathering. And water weathering on the Sphinx could be a problem if the Sphinx was built in 2500 BC, because there isn't a whole lot of rainfall in Egypt. Robert Schoch came along as a geologist on John's invitation, and he studied the Sphinx closely. And he went on the record to say that the Sphinx is indeed marked by water weathering. Today, because the Sphinx has been so heavily restored, you can see that water weathering most clearly on the trench around the Sphinx, those deep vertical fissures. These are classic examples of precipitation-induced weathering, weathering caused by heavy rainfall, and not just a day of heavy rainfall, but 1,000 years of heavy rainfall, which hollows out the weaker areas of the stone and leaves the stronger areas in place. And this is the problem, because the science of climatology is very clear. No such rains fell in Egypt in 2500 BC, just as they don't fall in Egypt today. You have to go back to near the end of the last ice age, to the Younger Dryas, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, to get the kind of sustained rains that could have caused the weathering on the Sphinx. And this I regard as hard and clearly comprehensible evidence. What about the Sphinx temple? No inscriptions have survived there, so we really don't know anything about who made it. And then if we go to the Vali temple, it's interesting how I.E.S. Edwards, who was one of the great authorities on ancient Egypt, changes his tune slightly between 1947 and 1993. 1947, around each doorway, this is now the Vali temple, is a band of hieroglyphic inscription giving the name and titles of the king. No other inscriptions or relief occur anywhere else in the building. You would conclude from that he's referring to the king Khafre, who's supposed to have built the pyramid, but he clarifies in 1993. Around each doorway was carved a band of hieroglyphic inscription giving the name of titles of the king, but only the last words, beloved of the goddess Bastet and beloved of the goddess Hathor, are preserved. In other words, it doesn't refer to Khafre. We don't know who it refers to. And then something else really strange. Look what's going on here. These are granite facing blocks, and they've been laid on top of heavily eroded limestone blocks. And it was so, those heavily eroded limestone core blocks of the temple were so important to whoever put those granite blocks in place that they actually cut the granite blocks to fit over the erosions. And Robert Schoch's view, as expressed to me in an email in 2015, is that the granite sheathing was added in the Old Kingdom to repair and restore the earlier, much earlier, Sphinx Age limestone temples. So let's get inside there. And again, you can see in the Valley Temple, you can see this very ancient weathered limestone, and then the granite that's been added all around it. Two epochs. The epoch of heavy rains, 12,000 years ago, and the epoch of the pharaohs, 4,500 years ago, just as at the pyramids, both expressed in this monument. There's one other site in Egypt that's very similar. It's an astonishing place. It's called the Osirion, and it's at Abydos in Upper Egypt. It's a very mysterious site. It was covered, it lies 50 feet lower than the Temple of Seti I, behind which it is situated. It was covered in sediment and excavated in the 19th century. Again, it's this giant megalithic architecture. And again, what we see at the Osirion is much more ancient work, which has been modified in pharaonic times. Now, the notion of a much more ancient megalithic culture in Egypt was laughed at by Egyptologists when Robert Schoch and John Anthony West started talking about the possible antiquity of the megalithic cultures. Egyptologists said, absolute nonsense. Mark Lehner in particular said, 12,000 years ago? You've got to be kidding. Show me a single potsherd, show me a single object. Show me anything from 12,000 years ago that shows a civilization capable of creating something like the Sphinx or the Valley Temple, and I might listen to you, but there's no such thing. Well, Mark Lehner can't say that anymore today because of the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Göbekli Tepe is a gigantic megalithic site, and it's 11,600 years old. It dates to the end of the Younger Dryas. If you can make Göbekli Tepe, you can make the Sphinx. And this is what Göbekli Tepe looks like. It's recently been covered in a huge canopy, which I have mixed feelings about. But by and large, I think it's worthy. I think it's important to preserve this site. I think it's good that they covered it. But it was nice to be able to see it before it was covered. You get a sense of these T-shaped, very large limestone pillars, many of which weigh in the range of 20 tons. It's an enormous site. I first went there in 2013. Here's one of those pillars in the quarry. They didn't take it out of the quarry because it had a fault in it. They just left it there. And here I am with Klaus Schmidt. These Göbekli Tepe megalithic pillars are truly on a more than human scale. And some of them are smaller. They all have this T-shape. Many of them have this T-shaped form. And again, I'm with Klaus Schmidt. Sadly, Klaus passed away in 2014. Normally, when I turn up uninvited at an archaeological site, I get the sort of reaction that Dracula would have got from priests, you know. They hold up the cross and drive me away. But Klaus Schmidt knew exactly who I was. I introduced myself honestly, and he gave me 3 days of his time. And he showed, real gentleman, he showed me around Göbekli Tepe. He gave me the benefit of all his knowledge and all his insights. I'm so sad that he passed on and that his role has been inherited by a narrow-minded group of rigid thinkers. Klaus is pointing emphatically at the ground because he's telling me, and this is common with archaeological sites, that they've only excavated a tiny part of the site. They've done ground-penetrating radar all over the site. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gigantic megalithic pillars still lying beneath the ground. This site is incredibly important. And it's not alone. This is Karahan Tepe. It's a second series of 12,000-year-old stone circles in southeastern Turkey. And these shots were taken in 2014. As you can see, the site has not been excavated in 2014. You can just see some of those pillars sticking out of the ground. It was, in fact, in a farmer's backyard. We went and talked to him, and he said, go ahead, take a look. Well, things have changed. It's been excavated today. And we went back in November last year to have a look at the excavations. And what they found is just absolutely stunning. This enclosure is hewn out of solid bedrock. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pillars. The 10th pillar is freestanding, that curved one. The others are all carved from solid bedrock. And there I am with Professor Nekmi Karul, who's the lead archaeologist at Graham Tepi. He tells me quite confidently that the site is of the same age as Göbekli Tepe, and that they're just beginning on the excavations. I find that stone head, which is actually carved out of solid bedrock, on a sort of serpentine neck that sticks out of the rock, I find it really spooky. I don't know what they were doing in there, but it's a very weird place. And it's out of place in time. People 12,000 years ago weren't supposed to have been doing stuff like this. That's why Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe are rewriting history, because previously archaeologists used to tell us that big megalithic sites like this could only be the work of highly organized agricultural civilizations. So your Stonehenge, for example, 5,000 years ago, even Gigantea in Malta, 6,000 years ago, which is about the oldest, they're all supposed to be the work of settled communities who had generated surpluses, who could free people up to become architects, engineers, and so on and so forth. You don't expect to find them in places where the work was done entirely by hunter-gatherers. But both Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe were inhabited only by hunter-gatherers when these projects began. But after 1,000 years, every single one of those hunter-gatherers had become agriculturalists and farmers. Far from the archaeological model which says the farming came first and the megaliths came second, we have a situation here where gigantic megalithic sites came first and the farming came second. I would suggest that the megalithic sites were used to mobilize local people, to teach them new skills. I think we're looking at a transfer of technology here. And some curiosities, the T-shaped megaliths of Göbekli Tepe. There's T-shaped megaliths at Minorca, on the island of Minorca in the Mediterranean, dated, archaeologists say, to about 4,000 years ago, but maybe Göbekli Tepe should require us to reconsider the dating of the Minorca megaliths. And there now, Göbekli Tepe covered in its canopy, looking down on it, that those circular or oval enclosures, and we see more of them here, again, before the canopy was put up, are very similar to the pattern of the great megalithic temples of Malta, which the whole dating exercise of the megalithic temples of Malta rests on 2 carbon dates, just 2 carbon dates, neither of which came from underneath a megalith. How can we be sure of the age of these temples? I suspect the Maltese temples are much older also. Let's go over to the Lebanon and to Baalbek in the Lebanon. If I had a big screen in front of me and a pointer, I could point all this out to you. I don't dispute that the central temple complex was built by the Romans. Those great pillars there, they're Roman work. In the background, behind them, is the temple of Bacchus, the god of wine, also a Roman temple. No dispute about that. The Romans were fantastic builders. Very down-to-earth people, too. No, it's not the central temple complex. It's this big wall that runs right around that temple complex, which shows every sign of being much older, as though the temple were put there because that enclosure wall existed. You can see me for scale down on the bottom right there. And what I want to draw your attention to is these 3 blocks, which are called the trilithon. Each one of them weighs 800 tons. Go figure how they got them up to that altitude, those 3 800-ton blocks. I'm sitting on one of them in the lower left there. I'm pointing up at them from outside there. And they're not the biggest. The biggest ones still remain in the quarry. There, I'm standing on a block that weighs 1,000 tons. And again, on that 1,000-ton block, I just want to draw your attention to the one on the left side of the picture, which was recently excavated. That turns out to weigh 1,400 tons. Over on the other side of the road is this 1,200-ton block, which is sadly being used as a rubbish dump today. And there's a view of the main blocks in the quarry. Archaeologists will tell you that this was all the work of the Romans. They built the Temple of Jupiter, they built the Temple of Bacchus, they built that huge megalithic wall surrounding the complex, and they carved out these megaliths. But guess what? They found they were too heavy to move, so they just left them there. In my opinion, that's a very un-Roman way to behave. These were practical people. If they had carved these blocks, and if they had found they couldn't move them, they certainly wouldn't have left them in the quarry. They would have sliced them up like loaves of bread into smaller blocks and used them in their construction. The fact that they're there in the quarry suggests to me the Romans didn't even know they were there. They were covered by sediment at that time. Let's jump over to South America, to Peru, to the Andes, to the majestic and deeply mysterious site of Sacsayhuaman, supposedly entirely the work of the Incas. I dispute that. Here's a group of school kids, and they're being taught that the walls of Sacsayhuaman were built entirely by the Incas. Very recently, the Incas were a relatively recent civilization, sort of rose to prominence around the 1300s, destroyed by the Spaniards in the 1500s. All of this is supposed to have been done between the 1300s and the 1500s, according to Orthodox archaeology. Just take a look at those walls. These stones are really on an enormous scale. I'm there to just give you a sense of that scale, weighing hundreds of tons and so precisely joined together that you can't get a sheet of paper between the joints. And this is where, as somebody suggested yesterday, the notion of poured and melted stone kind of begins to make sense and is worthy of further inquiry. Look at those indentations in the stone. They don't have any practical function. What are they doing there? It's almost like it was like butter, and it was pressed down on. Again, these scallops out of these stones, very odd. Why would it be like that unless the material was soft beforehand? And the fitting of the blocks is just absolutely stunning. Again, archaeologists say no problem. You know, a stonemason with a stone hammer could have done all of this and just put it all together. You know, they give you examples of the stone hammers, which are these sort of round balls of stone. I just don't get it. I mean, this was not done with stone hammers. This is high tech, incredibly precise, incredibly sophisticated work. And that jointing, the precision, the way these blocks are brought together is just absolutely stunning. Look at that beautiful line there up at Sacsayhuaman. And compare it with the Osirion, those older blocks in the background. And here we have Garcilaso el Inca de la Vega, who was half Inca himself and who wrote about the Incas. And he tells us that the Incas had no other tools to work the stones than some black stones called huihuana, with which they dressed the stone to be worked by pounding rather than cutting. Does this look like a work of pounding to you? It doesn't look like it to me. This is not crude pounding. This is high precision masonry. In some places, you can see that we're looking at different epochs. We're looking at different epochs. Some of those, the style of the stonework changes. Look at those crude, rough stones that we see around these much finer stones. I don't dispute that the crude, rough stones were the work of the Incas. They were topping up, overbuilding on pre-existing structures. This is the Coricancha, a beautiful, incredibly precise temple in the heart of Cusco. And this is definitely Inca workmanship. And it was important workmanship for the Incas because this was the island of the moon. This was the Temple of the Moon. But look at that work. It doesn't compare in any way with the majesty of Sacsayhuaman, with the precision, with the scale of Sacsayhuaman. This is nice work, but it's nothing to write home about, to be honest. Let's go to Pisac. Again, you see here, not, in my opinion, something that is entirely Inca, something that the Incas were involved with, where they overbuilt and built around pre-existing structures. So definitely in the foreground, this is undoubtedly Inca work. It looks just like the work at the Temple of the Moon. But what about the finer work here? And the Intihuatana, the so-called hitching post of the sun carved out of solid bedrock in the center of it. And what about Naopahuaca, which is down the Sacred Valley towards Machu Picchu? Again, a mixture of styles. Back there on the right, definitely Inca work. But what about this high precision work cut out of the rock on the left? I think the Incas came and they honored a much older site by building their structure there as well. They honored and respected it. They never destroyed it. They overbuilt, they built around it. Another example here, and this is a very strange structure, Amaru Mura, the so-called gateway of the gods in the Peruvian Andes. Look at the little cutout in the center of that. This T-shaped cutout. Some people think it's a doorway to another dimension. Maybe it is. Why not? We'll go back to Sacsayhuaman. I just want to show you some of the weird stuff that's up there, as it really is very strange. And here I'm with Jesus Gamarra. Jesus Gamarra is in his high 70s now. Well, I'm in my low 70s, so we're not so far apart. But I tell you, walking around those Andean monuments with Jesus Gamarra was a real lesson to me, because this guy just bounds up everything like a mountain goat, and I'm going, wheezing, can't keep up with him. He has dedicated his entire life and followed his father, who dedicated his entire life to the study of Sacsayhuaman. And Jesus Gamarra is absolutely convinced that the Incas were not responsible for the mass of the work at Sacsayhuaman, only for the smaller work that was built upon it later. And he says that as a descendant of the Incas himself. That's not me saying that. That's Jesus Gamarra saying it. And he's just showing me that what's this stairway to nowhere doing here? And look at this. It almost seems upside down. I mean, what is going on? It's really hard to understand what all this was about. A lot of it was rock-hewn, carved out of solid rock, like these features, which are all over Sacsayhuaman. And then some of the fine workmanship that you see done there is far beyond those pounding tools of the Incas. We're dealing again with high precision stonemasonry. The upper picture is from a place near Cusco, and I insist we cannot know the antiquity of these huge stones. And down in the lower picture from Turkey, Alakahoyuk, again, the stonework is of unknown antiquity. You can't date stone. They look very similar to me. Is it a coincidence, or is there some hidden connection? And then, what about these T-shapes? Göbekli Tepe in the middle, that doorway in Amaru Muru that I showed you, and there from the Edfu temple in Upper Egypt. That T-shaped pattern keeps on repeating. This is Cutimbo, also in Peru. And I'm interested in the carvings on the walls of those structures. Upper image is from Cutimbo. It's a feline with a curled tail. The lower images are both from Göbekli Tepe, felines with curved tails. The left image is from Cutimbo. The right image is from Göbekli Tepe. Cutimbo on the left, Göbekli Tepe on the right. Cutimbo on the left, Göbekli Tepe on the right. Very similar imagery. Göbekli Tepe on the base of one of the pillars. This strange figure seems to be almost playing a drum, and very similar figures at Cutimbo. Temple of the Moon at Cusco. This serpentine form coming out of it with a large head. It's almost more like a sperm than a serpent. And exactly the same device is found at Göbekli Tepe on the right, the same kind of representation of a serpent. Let's go to Tiwanaku. in Bolivia, and to the part of Tiwanaku that is known as the Pumapunku. There you find truly gigantic megaliths. Again, I'm in there for scale. You can get a sense of how enormous this block of andesite is. And in the background, you can see these H-shaped carved stones. And some closer ups on the H-shaped stones in the middle there. Curiously, that H device that we find at the Pumapunku also turns up on the pillars at Göbekli Tepe, the same pattern that we would recognize as an H. Of course, all of this could be a coincidence, could be, but as these similarities begin to add up, I find myself overtaken by a curious conviction that there's something going on that isn't properly explained. An aerial view of Tiwanaku. The big walled structure on the right is called the Kalasasea. The pyramid on the left is called the Akapana Pyramid. Santa and I had an amazing, amazing trip in a light aircraft. Tiwanaku stands at 14,000 feet. So, you know, to photograph it from 4,000 feet above, you're up at 18,000 feet. And that in an airplane with no oxygen is no joke. We had a wild German pilot with staring blue eyes who would just do anything, absolutely anything crazy. And he flew us around Tiwanaku many, many times. And Santa got these shots. Let's take a look at the Kalasasea. Most archaeologists won't tell you this, but the Kalasasea is almost entirely a modern construction. It's an archaeological fantasy. What's not a fantasy are those big megaliths that stand out. They're the true original Kalasasea. The rest of it was put together by archaeologists in the 20th century from blocks of stone lying around. It's how they think it might have looked. But the big megaliths formed the entire enclosure originally. And again, we're looking down on the Kalasasea and on the ruined Akapana Pyramid. Now, if you look at the lower left of the screen, just here, you will see an object called the Gateway of the Sun. And that object didn't originally stand there. It stood here in the center, looking out through the gateway here. But it was moved by archaeologists. There's the Gateway of the Sun. It does play with the sun in very nice ways, wherever it's situated. And here's the curious thing. The Gateway of the Sun, from its original position, targeted the rising sun on the summer solstice 12,500 years ago, in 10,500 BC. Not today. I've told you about precession, the wobble on the axis of the Earth, but there's another motion of the Earth, and it's called the obliquity of the ecliptic. And over a cycle of 41,000 years, the Earth does this slow nod. And that, of course, affects the rising position of the sun on the solstices. Not on the equinox, which is perfectly due east, but on the winter and the summer solstices. This alignment of the gateway of the sun through the central doorway was with the summer solstice, not 2,000 or 3,000 years ago when Tiwanaku was supposed to have been built, but more than 12,000 years ago. On the gateway itself, there are some very odd carvings. Archaeologists are convinced that the carving on the right is a representation of two condors back to back, as indeed the carving on the left certainly is, but I don't see that carving on the right as two condors back to back. I see it as we've represented it in the middle and highlighted it. I see it as an elephant with tusks. And, well, the megafauna went extinct during the Younger Dryas about 12,000 years ago. If this is truly an image of a mastodon or a mammoth, then it's telling us this is very, very, very old. And it's not the only thing. In the so-called subterranean temple that just lies outside the main gateway, we have this image which is universally recognized as an image of the civilizing hero Viracocha. Viracocha is another figure like Quetzalcoatl and Osiris, who comes in a time of darkness after a great flood, bringing the gifts of civilization. And he is a bearded figure, once again. Do I need to point this out? Perhaps I do. There's his beard. There's his beard. A bearded figure. There's a serpent running down the side of his body, but not only a serpent, because at the top, right up here, there's an animal that's really quite hard to identify unless you're prepared to go back to the last ice age, because that is a creature that looks a lot like Toxodon. And Toxodon was one of those megafauna that went extinct during the Younger Dryas cataclysm about 12,000 years ago. We're told in the legends and traditions of the Andes that after he had completed his civilizing mission, Viracocha went to Manta in Ecuador, and from there he crossed the Pacific Ocean, walking on the water. And curiously, there is evidence of underwater structures in the Pacific. I put some old press clippings there. Nobody's ever followed this up. But what is in the Pacific Ocean, a couple of thousand miles from the coast of Peru, is Easter Island, with its famous megalithic statues, the so-called moai, which stand on platforms called ahus. Now, how do Egyptologists date the moai? Not Egyptologists. I got a thing about Egyptologists. Archaeologists, how do they date the moai? We know you can't date stone. Carbon dating only works on organic material. There is no really good technique to date stone unless you can say that this stone has been buried and hidden from light for a very long period. Then you can date the last time it was exposed to light. But you can't actually date the stone itself. So what you want is organic material that you can associate with the object you want to date. And you can conclude that that object belongs to the same period as the organic material. So how do archaeologists date the moai? They date them from organic material found in the platforms underneath the moai. And they're saying those platforms are obviously the same age as the statues, and therefore we can tell you that the statues are no more than 600 years old or so from the organic material. But any fool can see that this platform is not the same age as the statues. My God, there's even an Easter Island head actually in it. This is a reconstruction. This is a reconstruction. This is not right to just derive the date of the statues from organic material from a reconstructed platform that actually uses a bit of one of those statues in the reconstruction. It's really bad scholarship, in my view. Ahu Vinapu is one of the most fantastic ahus on Easter Island, and it is original, and it's made of basalt, and Robert Schock has looked into this. There's no basalt quarries on Easter Island. He suspects that they may be underwater. Easter Island was once a much bigger island than it is today, and a diving expedition needs to be done to prove that. But it's interesting to look at Ahu Vinapu and to look at its stonework, which is really quite like the stonework of Sacsayhuaman and those big mysterious structures in the Andes. And here in the Rano Raraku crater, fantastic place, you see so many of these Easter Island heads just sticking out of the ground. And you could be forgiven for thinking that they just go down a few inches under the soil. That's what you would expect if they were just 600 years old, because you wouldn't get more than a few inches of soil accumulating around the base of them in 600 years, especially on a tiny island. But Thor Heyerdahl proved that this was not the case when he excavated that statue. That statue goes down 30 feet underground. It was covered with sedimentation that would have taken thousands of years to accumulate. And there's Thor standing at the base of the statue for scale. That statue is not 600 or 700 years old. That statue is thousands of years old. I had the good fortune to know Thor Heyerdahl, And I met him several times, actually, but the last time was at the pyramids of Guimar in Tenerife on the 21st of June. This was before 21st of June 2000, the year 2000. This was before Göbekli Tepe was really entering public consciousness, and Tor and I, for that matter, were not aware of Göbekli Tepe at that time. But I believe if Tor had been aware of Göbekli Tepe, that he would have been intrigued by the hand patterns on the Göbekli Tepe pillars and the belt that they wear, which are so similar to the Easter Island Moai. Legends speak of a primeval Pacific homeland called Hiva, from which the first inhabitants of Easter Island came. This homeland was submerged under the sea. What's really intriguing about this is that 7 sages, quote, king's sons, all initiated men, were instrumental in the original settlement of Easter Island. The first task of the 7 sages from Hiva after their arrival on Easter Island was the construction of stone mounds. Keep that 7 sages in your mind, because we have 7 sages in Mesopotamia too, and they are also involved in the bringing of civilization. Their leader is a figure called Oannes. He's shown on the right wearing this curious fish costume. Others of his followers are shown in the other images, and they're remembered as teaching advanced astronomical and geodetic knowledge, including all the skills necessary for planning and setting out a city. And what I'd like to draw your attention to, and again I will need to indicate, is the curious little man bags that these guys are carrying. These curious little man bags. There's even stone representations of them that have survived. I call them man bags. The odd thing is that if we go back to Göbekli Tepe, now in the case of Mesopotamia, we're looking at artworks here that were created probably 4,500 years ago, showing these curious little bags. But if we go to Göbekli Tepe, which we know is 11,600 years old, and by the way, before I come to that point, I just mentioned this. A colleague of mine, Madeleine Daines, researching in the Cuneiform Digital Library, found this tablet kept in the Louvre Museum in Paris. I said at the points indicated by the green arrows, actually I mean by the red arrows. What this tablet shows is a pair of T-shaped pillars in an oval enclosure. And it raises the possibility that some sites of the Göbekli Tepe type were still functioning in Mesopotamian times and were recognized and remembered by them. Anyway, at Göbekli Tepe, it turns out on Pillar 43 in Enclosure D that you have a representation of 3 of those man bags, just like the bags being carried by the 7 sages. Suggests to me again that we're looking at an emblem of a brotherhood of civilizers who traveled around the world, and one of the places they taught their knowledge was Göbekli Tepe. And not only in Göbekli Tepe, that figure from La Venta with the plumed serpent is also holding a man bag, very similar to the man bags shown on the top of Pillar 43 in Enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe. Coincidence? Maybe. So all these figures, the 7 sages of Easter Island, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, they were bringers of civilization. They were civilizing heroes. That's what they're remembered for, of coming in a time of cataclysm, when the world of humanity is destroyed and utterly demoralized, and they're teaching the survivors how to create civilization again. And there's only one epoch in the lifetime of the human species that really fits the bill. And that is the epoch that geologists call the Younger Dryas, and it extends from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. Could be 12,900, could be 11,500, but you get the picture. It's about 1,200 years of absolute cataclysm and chaos in the world. What happens on Earth begins in the sky. And this is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. It's a compelling, it's a thoroughly documented case. It's made by a group of more than 60 eminent scientists, and they argue that the Earth was hit 12,800 years ago by multiple fragments of a disintegrating comet. Some of those fragments were small, some were very large and devastating in their effects. Where do comets come from? They come in from interstellar space. They come in from the very outskirts of the solar system and beyond. The solar system is in its own orbit around the Milky Way, which brings it into particular conjunction with comets at certain times. From the Kuiper Belt and from the Oort cloud, these big comets come winging in from deep space and enter the inner solar system. And they're not just dirty snowballs. You know, we're taught to fear asteroids, these big stony things. And comets, we shouldn't worry about them because they're just dirty snowballs. That's what some scientists have said. No, they are not just dirty snowballs. They are bound together by ice, but they contain enormous lumps of rock. The nucleus of a giant comet can exceed 200 kilometers in diameter. Several have been spotted by astronomers in recent years. Far out there, not yet in the inner solar system. What we're looking at in the lower part of the image is the 5-kilometer wide nucleus of comet 67P, photographed by the Rosetta probe and landed on by the Philae lander. It's curious the way NASA uses these Egyptian words, the Rosetta probe, the Philae lander, many others as well. Well, that's putting that nucleus in context of San Francisco. Those are the dimensions of the nucleus. And it doesn't take a big imagination to realize what kind of effect an object like that hitting the Earth at 60,000 miles an hour would do. And that's a comet, that's not an asteroid. Well, we all had forewarning of what comets do. Comets break up into multiple fragments as they're affected by the gravitational pull of planets and of the sun. Those ice bindings connecting the big lumps of rock separate, and they separate out. And Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 hit Jupiter in 1994. But before it hit Jupiter, it broke up into 21 glowing, deadly fragments. And when those fragments hit Jupiter, they unleashed an unbelievable cataclysm. The total explosive power was 300 gigatons, and a gigaton is equivalent to 1 billion tons of TNT. The stockpiled nuclear arsenal of the entire Earth, were it to explode at once, would be just 6.4 gigatons. Well, Jupiter's a big guy. Jupiter can take it. And this is the moment where I always want to say, thank you, Jupiter. Thank you for taking one for the team. Because actually, with its enormous gravity, Jupiter sweeps up most of the comets that would enter the inner solar system and threaten the Earth. But it doesn't sweep them all up. As we know, there was a terrible cataclysm 65, 66 million years ago, which wiped out the dinosaurs. And it left a distinct mark in the Earth, which used to be called the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary, is now called the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. I don't know why they keep changing the names. But what we are now finding out, its general view is that that was an asteroid, but recent research has indicated very strongly that it wasn't an asteroid. It was, again, a fragment of a very large comet that caused the destruction, the absolute extinction of the dinosaurs. And really, whether it was a comet or an asteroid, the outcome was the same. The world was changed utterly. How things were was swept away, and a new order began to emerge. It was so bad that it literally turned dinosaurs into chickens. Because they are the surviving remnants of the dinosaur clade. It turned dinosaurs into chickens. When dinosaurs ruled the Earth, we mammals were going nowhere. We didn't have a hope with those big guys out there. This is a mammal on the right, Purgatorius, of that same period, a little shrew-like creature. once the dinosaurs were out of the way, the mammals began to proliferate and to evolve at an incredibly rapid rate. And here we are today, the direct descendants of those mammals that took advantage of the new niches that were opened up and evolved in all kinds of directions. So meet your 65 million year old mother. We would not be here if that comet had not made the dinosaurs extinct 65 million years ago. It changed the world forever. And this dashed line marks the Cretaceous Tertiary or the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. And it's a layer of ash and soot, and it's filled with the characteristic chemical indications of a colossal cosmic impact. They're called impact proxies. And they include iridium, carbon microspherules, nanodiamonds, shocked quartz, melt glass, similar to trinitite, suicite, and other minerals that had been melted at temperatures in excess of 2,200 degrees centigrade. That's the boiling point of quartz. These impacts unleash such incredible heat. They come in so fast, they're so huge that they can literally boil quartz. And that's what we find in the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary. Now, it was Lewis and Walter Alvarez who first proposed that the dinosaurs had been made extinct by a cosmic impact. And they were convinced of that on the basis of the impact proxies alone. They did not need any other evidence, but the rest of the scientific community turned upon them like a pack of wolves. How dare they suggest that this was caused by an impact? If there was such a big impact, of course there would be a crater. And there's no crater. So for years they were ridiculed and humiliated by their colleagues until this was discovered, the Chicxulub crater in the Yucatan in Mexico, deeply buried, revealed only by remote scanning. And since that crater was discovered, the scientific community said, sorry, Lewis and Walter Alvarez, actually you were right. We got it wrong. They were right. If extinction level events caused by comets and asteroids occur only once every 100 million years, and that's what NASA teaches us, then we don't have much to worry about, do we? Because the last one was 65 million years ago. So we got, what, 35 million years left? Who cares? None of us are going to be around in 35 million years. But since the 1980s, a number of eminent astronomers have warned that our cosmic environment may be much more active than NASA believes. And their concern is with comets. And I'm showing Fred Hoyle, who's passed away, Chandra Wickram Singh, Victor Klube, and Bill Napier. They're all leading major scientific figures. NASA on meteor showers. NASA seems to have a mission to keep us all calm. It's like some sort of calming drug. What can I think of? Can't think of the name of one of them, but one of those things that just kind of chills you out, NASA's that, it just chills you out. Don't worry about the environment out there. It's all safe. What's a meteor shower? Well, a meteor, NASA accept, all meteor showers are the remnants of disintegrated comets. Every single meteor that you see is a bit of a disintegrated comet, and there are multiple meteor streams, the Orionids, the Perseids, the Aquarids, and the Taurids, which I'll come to. And NASA says, look, we see the shooting stars, but don't worry. They're usually small, dust particle to boulder size, always small enough to burn up quickly in the atmosphere, so there's little chance that any of them will strike the Earth's surface. Just basically, there's nothing to worry about. It's official. But not all astronomers share this view. Victor Klube and Bill Napier in particular, whose astonishing book, The Cosmic Serpent, published in the 1980s, I highly recommend to you. And they're winning the support of growing numbers of astronomers. And they've made a persuasive case that the Earth is orbiting in the trail of a giant destroyed comet, and several times in the past 20,000 years has suffered cataclysmic bombardments from bits of cometary debris with profound implications for history. It's the Taurid meteor stream that they focus on particularly. By the way, we are passing through the Taurid meteor stream right now. The Taurid meteor stream is 30 million kilometers wide. it consists of multiple individual fragments of debris, all of which came from a single large giant comet progenitor. One of them is still recognized as a comet. It's Comet Encke. Curious that, again, a name from the ancient past. Comet Encke is part of the Taurid meteor stream. So is Comet Olgiato, Comet Rudnicki. 19 of the brightest near-Earth objects are part of the Taurid meteor stream. And they're all the remnants of a much larger comet that fragmented, just like Shoemaker-Levy 9 fragmented before it hit Jupiter. It's called the Taurid meteor stream, not actually because it comes from the constellation of Taurus, but because it appears to come from the constellation of Taurus. If you look up at the sky and see where those meteors are coming, and now's a perfect time to do it, you'll see that they're emanating from the region of the sky occupied by the constellation of Taurus. So for that's just a visual effect. It's an illusion, but that's why it's called the Taurid meteor stream. And there are two kinds of Taurids, the Taurids, the alpha Taurids that we're passing through in November, and the beta Taurids in June and July. The ones in November we see, the ones in June and July we don't see, because they're coming from the direction of the sun, but it doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Many astronomers believe that the largest single impact in recorded history, the Tunguska event of the 30th of June 1908, was caused by an object about 100 to 200 meters in diameter that fell out of the Taurid meteor stream and that exploded in the air over Siberia. It wasn't an impact, it was an airburst. And this is what it did. This happened on 30th of June 1908 at the peak of the beta Taurids. Fortunately, it exploded over an uninhabited area. It flattened 80 million trees across an area of more than 2,000 square kilometers, which is an area larger than London. If this event had occurred over a major city rather than over an uninhabited area, the loss of life would have been utterly horrendous. And we today would be paying much more attention to the Taurid meteor stream than we presently are. So while those astronomers have been looking up at the sky and at the Taurid meteor stream, an entirely separate group of scientists behind the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, they call themselves the Comet Research Group, have been looking at the ground and making disturbing new discoveries. Let's go back to Bill Napier. He was the first to connect the work of the two teams with a paper published in 2010 called Paleolithic Extinctions and the Taurid Complex. The evidence, decades old now and not even controversial amongst the comet community, is that an exceptionally large, low-inclination, short-period comet has been orbiting in our neighborhood for about 20,000 years ago. In such a disintegrating environment, there is a reasonable probability of a catastrophic encounter with debris in the comet tail. And they believe that such catastrophic encounters have occurred several times in the last 30,000 years with profound but unrecognized events on the course of human history. And that's another view of that same paper by Bill Napier, and he's connecting this catastrophe of connecting it to the work of the other team, the Comet Research Group, who are arguing a catastrophe of celestial origin which occurred around 12,900 or 12,800 years ago. And these guys, I need to say this because everybody calls me a pseudoscientist, and they say that I only report pseudoscientific theories. You can't call any of these guys pseudoscientists. You know, I mean, Jim Kennett's a marine biologist. He's a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He's a world-renowned expert on paleoceanography. Jim Firestone, I won't read out all their credentials, but these are highly credentialed people. And they are very concerned about what happened to the world around 12,900. They've refined the date a little bit to 12,800 years ago, and they began to publish their findings in peer-reviewed press from about 2007 onwards. And to understand why they got curious about the whole thing in the first place, what motivated their research, we need to consider the world during the Ice Age. The last glacial maximum was 21,300 years ago. The ice caps were more than 3 kilometers deep, and sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today. Very different looking world. and it was incredibly cold. But then after the maximum, the world began to gradually warm up, and that warming trend continued for thousands of years. And then suddenly, 12,800 years ago, you get this plunge into freezing temperatures. And then 11,600 years ago, the world radically warms up again. And the whole story of human civilization, as it's taught to us, supposedly unfolds in the period after the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas saw the extinction of the megafauna. All of those great mammoths, mastodons, the saber-toothed tigers, the giant sloths, the woolly rhinos, they all went extinct during the Younger Dryas, this episode of dramatic climate change and very radical sea level rise. In the Americas, 73% of the megafauna were wiped out. 73% in North America, almost 80% in South America. And it was a global cataclysm, not a cataclysm that was limited to the Americas. On the lower left, we're seeing the Younger Dryas boundary on the lower right from Belgium. It's all over the world, this Younger Dryas boundary. And I want to just show you some of the papers produced by this team, published in major journals, Nature, in scientific reports, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. I emphasize again, these are not pseudoscientists. These are serious, focused, mainstream scientists who are deeply concerned about what they regard as a real threat to our civilization. They are talking about what they find in the Younger Dryas boundary and the characteristic proxies of a cosmic impact. Those same proxies that convinced Lewis and Walter Alvarez that a cosmic impact had made the dinosaurs extinct. And just in the same way that Lewis and Walter Alvarez were at first ridiculed and ignored, so also the Comet Research Group have been sidelined by their colleagues. But the reports go on. There's a series of them that I'm putting up there. You'll see the date changes from 12,900 to 12,800 years ago. I just want to give you an example of how thorough this work is and how many papers have been published, hundreds and hundreds of papers. Journal of Geology, 5th of September 2014, nanodiamond-rich layer across 3 continents consistent with major cosmic impact at 12,800 years before the present. They've now established, back in 2015, with the knowledge as it then was, they set out this map of the Younger Dryas boundary field. We can see that it's heavily focused on North America and on Greenland, but that it extends into Europe. And actually, over here at point 22, it extends to a site called Abu Huraira, which is within spitting distance of Göbekli Tepe. These are all places where there were impacts 12,800 years ago during the Younger Dryas. A large platinum anomaly in the Greenland ice core points to a cataclysm at the onset of the Younger Dryas. Widespread platinum anomaly documented at the Younger Dryas onset in North American sedimentary sequences. Platinum is very rare in the Earth's crust, but it's common in asteroids and comets. A couple of papers from 2018, big biomass burning episode. Again, when these objects hit the Earth, they create an enormous amount of heat, and it sets forests ablaze, those primeval forests of the Ice Age. And then another one, did the black mat impact airburst reach the Antarctic? And they present evidence that it did reach the Antarctic. So as of 2014, the Younger Dryas strewn field of impact proxies had been traced across 50 million square kilometers. But by the May 2018 study reports their discovery in Antarctica and indicates that there's even a bigger disaster than we thought it was. And then this crater found in Greenland, really quite recently, is very intriguing. It's under ice. It was discovered with remote scanning. There's no doubt that it's a big impact crater, and there's no doubt that it's young. Most of the work that has been done on it suggests that it happened about, guess when? 12,000 years ago. It's not locked and sealed yet. More work has to be done, but the preliminary evidence suggests strongly that this happened right at the end of the last ice age.
that a huge object hit Greenland and left a crater that's now buried in ice. So it makes it very difficult to research, but the remote scanning leaves no doubt that we're dealing with an impact crater and that it's recent. Another paper from March 2019, southern Chile, more biomass burning. And there's the Abu Huraira story. Evidence of a cosmic impact at Abu Huraira, Syria, at the Younger Dryas onset. High temperature melting, 2,200 degrees centigrade. There's the Abu Huraira site. There's Göbekli Tepe and Abu Huraira. As you can see, they're very close to each other. And this is an artist's impression of the Abu Huraira airburst done by Jennifer Rice of the Comet Research Group. I had a debate with Michael Shermer, the editor of The Skeptic magazine, on the Joe Rogan show back in 2017. It didn't really go well for Michael. Not entirely because of me, but because Randall Carlson was there as well. And Randall Carlson is just a brilliant self-taught geologist, and he destroyed Michael Shermer in that interview. The skeptical case just fell apart. Well, I want to give credit to Michael Shermer because he put out this tweet after the Abu Huraira evidence was found. And he said, "Okay, Graham Hancock, I shall adjust my priors in light of more research like this and modify my credence about your theory." You know, I appreciate Michael for doing that. There's very few scientists who are willing to swallow their pride in that way and admit that they were wrong. So thank you, Michael, for telling the truth. Really appreciate it. More on this massive impact crater in Greenland. We have further evidence from Chile, melt glass. This is a very recent paper, just published a month or so ago. Can't read the exact date on the screen. Melt glass all over the Atacama Desert in Chile, again caused by a cosmic impact. So despite the toxic hostility of their gradualist colleagues, it looks increasingly likely that the scientists of the Comet Research Group are really onto something. And it's really important, and that their Younger Dryas impact hypothesis will be vindicated, and it's going to change everything about how we view our past. In summary, 12,800 years ago, multiple fragments of a giant comet impacted the Earth. At least 4 of the fragments were objects in the range of 2 kilometers in diameter. Impacts were concentrated on the North American ice cap and the contiguous Greenland ice cap, but the resulting climate disaster was worldwide. There's the Hiawatha crater in Greenland. You can see how close it is to North America. Those North American impacts and the Greenland impacts were all part of the same cluster, the same swarm of comet fragments that came in and hit that part of the Earth as the Earth turned beneath them. At that time, there was a mysterious interruption of the Gulf Stream. And no wonder. The Gulf Stream is the central heating system of our planet. But if you suddenly unleash vast quantities of icy water melted by that comet impact into the world ocean, of course it's going to interrupt the Gulf Stream. And when it interrupts the Gulf Stream, it's going to bring global temperatures shooting down, exactly as happened during the Younger Dryas. And weirdly, when you have a freeze incident, you do not expect sea level to rise. But in this case, it did. Sea level rose at the same time as this deep freeze, which again supports the notion that we're looking at the outcome of a series of cosmic impacts on ice. Scientists are beginning to realize that there have been other periods in the remote past of the Earth when climate change has been caused by comet impact. And this one is from about 55 million years ago. I'm not able to read the report clearly in front of me here. But as early as the 1980s, Sir Fred Hoyle at Cambridge University paid attention not to the beginning of the Younger Dryas, 12,800 years ago, which was truly cataclysmic, but to the end of the Younger Dryas, 11,600 years ago, which, if anything, was even more cataclysmic. What happened then was that the world suddenly warmed up. This is 11,600 years ago, just boom, huge increase in temperatures, massive rise in sea levels. Geologists call it meltwater pulse 1b. It occurred 11,600 years ago. And he suggested that just as we now have from the Comet Research Group the notion that the 12,800 years ago impacts were largely on ice, he suggests that the 11,600 year ago impacts from the same fragmented comet, more debris from that comet, were in a world ocean, threw up a huge cloud of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, created a greenhouse effect, and warmed up the Earth. And at the same time, meltwater pulse 1b raised sea level dramatically. So the science on the end of the Younger Dryas isn't as well documented or so thoroughly investigated as the science on the beginning of the Younger Dryas. But whatever the agency, what is sure is that the Younger Dryas did end abruptly 11,600 years ago. Global temperatures soared. The remaining ice caps very rapidly collapsed into the sea, causing a dramatic pulse of sea level rise, and that's meltwater pulse 1b. This is universally accepted. Not the comet aspect of it, but meltwater pulse 1b is fully recognized by all geologists, 11,600 years ago. House of History seems to stand on solid foundations. You know, we have this, John West used to call it from primitive cavemen to smart us with our striped toothpaste. It's a sort of long line of just straightforward, constant, slow progress and evolution. So the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, Neolithic, then we get the first civilizations. This is the House of History built by archaeology. But what they haven't yet done is they haven't put the Younger Dryas into the picture between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. Hidden amongst those foundations, the scientific evidence that we've just reviewed of a previously unsuspected extinction-level global cataclysm changes everything. Historians and archaeologists haven't had the time, or actually they've not had the will, to factor the implications of the Younger Dryas event into their model and timeline of the origins of civilization. And this is the curious thing. That date of 11,600 years ago, which is meltwater pulse 1b, when we saw a massive rise in sea level, is also the date that Plato gives us for the destruction of Atlantis. Many people are under the mistaken belief that Atlantis is some kind of New Age invention, but it's not. The earliest surviving mention of Atlantis comes in the work of Plato, in the dialogues the Timaeus and the Critias. And Plato helps us to date the event. Shall I read all this out? I think I probably won't. You can read it for yourselves about how the gods purged the earth with a flood of water. Plato got the story from his ancestor Solon. And Solon visited Egypt, and it's a well-known and documented visit in the date that we call 600 BC. In other words, 2,600 years ago. That's when Plato visited Egypt. And he there met priests at the temple of Sais in the Delta, a temple that no longer exists. And those priests Solon asked the priests about inscriptions on the walls of the temple, and they said, that's the story of Atlantis. And they described to him how Atlantis was once a beautiful, generous culture, dedicated to the nature of spirit, but that it became arrogant and cruel and materialistic, and it ceased to carry its prosperity with moderation. That's what the priests told Solon. That's what Solon passed down through his family line to Plato. That's what Plato reports in the Timaeus and the Critias. It was an advanced civilization, advanced architecture, advanced agriculture, advanced navigational, shipbuilding and seagoing skills, advanced social and political organization. It's prefaced with an account of a celestial cataclysm, and then we learn that in a single dreadful day and night, Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea and vanished. Mankind had to begin again like children, Plato tells us, with no memory of what went before. And here's the thing. Plato's report is based on Solon. Solon's visit to Egypt was in 600 BC. When the priests told him the story of Atlantis, Solon asked them, when did this happen? And they said, 9,000 years ago. That was in 600 BC. Do the math. 9,600 BC is 11,600 years ago. It's meltwater pulse 1b, which Plato couldn't possibly have known about. It's the date of the foundation of Göbekli Tepe. This is incredibly important evidence that's been passed down to it. It allows us to put a precise date on the submergence of Atlantis 11,600 years ago. There is a temple in Egypt that has survived, unlike the Temple of Sais, which does record the story of a lost civilization. Doesn't call it Atlantis, but it's a lost civilization nonetheless. And this is the Temple of Edfu in Upper Egypt. It's a relatively recent temple. It was built on the site of an older temple, which had previously been built on the site of an even older temple, which had been built on the site of an even older temple, and the archives had been preserved, but were falling apart, and the priests decided to memorialize them and make them permanent by carving them into the walls of the Edfu temple. It's called the Edfu building texts, and most of them are in this corridor between the inner and outer enclosure walls. And these texts tell, basically, the story of Atlantis. They say how there was a homeland of the primeval ones. It was an island, and like Atlantis, it was destroyed in an immense and cataclysmic flood. A snake, and by the way, comets are often represented as snakes or serpents. A snake called the Great Leaping One is described as the chief enemy of the god. It's his assault that causes the homeland of the primeval ones to be swallowed up by the sea. But first the island was pierced and the domain was split. The texts say that there were survivors of the cataclysm, specifically named as 7 sages. Again, that theme repeats. And it talks of their wanderings afterwards and of their project to reconstitute or resurrect their lost former world. And it tells us how they came to Egypt and established religion in Egypt by building primeval mounds up and down the Nile Valley. And those primeval mounds were to be the foundations of all future temples and pyramids that would be built in Egypt. But they didn't only pursue this civilizing mission in Egypt, they pursued it in many other lands. And one of those, I suggest, was the land that we today call Turkey. Because that date, 11,600 years ago, comes up again at Göbekli Tepe. That's the foundation of Göbekli Tepe, according to the German Archaeological Institute. This is just all too much to be a coincidence. There's something going on here. Archaeology needs to wake up to this, to recognize what's happening here. This is the date that the German Archaeological Institute gives for the quote-unquote invention of megalithic architecture and agriculture at Göbekli Tepe. I mean, seriously. Did they invent megalithic architecture at Göbekli Tepe? Where did they learn to do it? Where's the evidence of the previous giant megalithics? So you don't just wake up one morning as a group of hunter-gatherers and think, oh, I'm going to create the biggest megalithic site that's ever going to be made on Earth, using 20-ton megaliths. You know, you have to have some background in that, or you have to have others who have experience and knowledge in how to do that. So there's Göbekli Tepe, there's Abu Huraira, there's Mesopotamia. And I would say what we're looking at in Göbekli Tepe is not a sudden, mysteriously precocious invention of agriculture and megalithic architecture. I think what we're looking at is a transfer of technology from the survivors of a lost civilization who already knew how to work megaliths, who already fully understood agriculture. And I think they used Göbekli Tepe as a project to mobilize the local community of hunter-gatherers, to put them to work. They would develop organizational skills. It would be a sacred project. They would focus their energies upon it. And in the process, they also taught them agriculture, transfer of technology, not an invention. So the evidence is mounting, I would say, that the House of History does stand on foundations of sand. And it's high time that the effects of the Younger Dryas cataclysm were taken into account by those who claim to have full possession of our past, namely archaeologists, those who claim to be the only spokesmen and spokeswomen for our past, those who deny the potential of individual citizens to contribute something useful to the study of the past, those elite archaeologists who so despise non-peer-reviewed people like me and call us pseudoscientists. And finally, what of the future of civilization? NASA's reassuring figure, those 100-million-year intervals, I think it's complacent. I think it's irresponsible. NASA tells us that none of the asteroids or comets that it's identified are going to impact the Earth anytime in the foreseeable future. Quote, all known potentially hazardous asteroids have less than a 0.01% chance of impacting the Earth in the next 100 years. Take that statement at face value, you're going to say, phew, we're safe. The problem is that NASA actually has no idea how many potentially hazardous asteroids exist. It can only report the number it's spotted so far, totaling at the time I made this slide 1,635. Of those, 877 have diameters of 1 kilometer or more. And it's true, there's very little likelihood that any of those that they've spotted so far are going to hit the Earth in the next 100 years. But it's the unidentified, unknown objects that should really concern us. And scientists estimate that so far only 1% of potentially hazardous asteroids have been identified, with 99%, more than 100,000 of them, still awaiting discovery. And I'm using the word asteroids and comets equally here, because what is a fragmented comet except a group of asteroids, those big rocky boulders? Are we getting wake-up calls from the universe? Some reports here, 2013, Chelyabinsk, 2014. I won't read these all out. 2015, 2016, 2017, all these near encounters with some big, some small objects. 2017, 2018, 2 small asteroids are buzzing Earth this weekend. See one live tonight. Small asteroid passes closer than TV satellites. NASA asteroid warning, 3 giant asteroids to pass Earth this Saturday. February 2019, NASA warns of near-miss asteroid passing Earth and another which could destroy it. NASA asteroid warning, NASA asteroid warning. June 2019, astronomers spotted a car-sized asteroid just hours before impact. July 2019, asteroid surprise close approach illustrates the need for more eyes on the sky. 2020, asteroid the size of a car has a near miss with Earth. 2021, record number of asteroids seen whizzing past the Earth in 2020. July 2021, asteroid the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza just flew safely by the Earth. That's a 6 million ton asteroid traveling at 60,000 miles an hour. Safely passed us by, fortunately. 25th of October 2021, an asteroid barely missed Earth last week and no one knew it was coming. Well, this is a 2015 report. Some scientists are beginning to wake up. They're beginning to recognize that we could be at much greater risk than we've imagined of these space objects. And, you know, I was working on this talk at 4:30 this morning, and I get the news releases from the Comet Research Group, and they sent me this report from PhysOrg. This happened last night, or the night before. This is November 12th. What is it today? 13th. So this happened the night before, on November the 11th. An Earth grazer flew a whopping 186 miles over 2 states, then vanished, NASA says. And NASA accepts that this was part of the Taurid meteor stream. NASA says an uptick in meteor sightings is expected annually between September and November as the planet passes through a broad stream of debris left by Comet Encke. No, not left by Comet Encke. Comet Encke is part of the debris stream, as is Comet Rudnicki, as is Comet Oggiato. They are all part of the debris stream of a much larger giant comet that had a nucleus of more than 100 kilometers in diameter. And there's the Taurid meteor stream again, an indication of Comet Encke in it, and of other objects, Tunguska-sized objects, and others flowing through it. And Victor Klube, Bill Napier, and Emilio Spedicato, mathematician at the University of Bergamo, their research and calculations indicate that in addition to the known Taurid objects, for example, Encke, Oggiato, Rudnicki, all in the range of 2 to 5 kilometers in diameter, there are also between 1 and 200 asteroids of more than 1 kilometer in diameter orbiting within the Taurid meteor stream. And amongst them, these scientists believe that at least one very large and as yet undetected object may be as much as 30 kilometers in diameter. You know, when comets stop outgassing, they get covered in a coating of tar, and it makes them completely dark and very hard to spot, but the mathematical calculations indicate that it's there. A 30-kilometer object hitting the Earth would be the end of all life on Earth. Our story, not just our story, the story of life on Earth, we'd be back to cockroaches. They might make it. Nobody else would. This is a very dangerous thing, the torrid meteor stream. And I'm not saying this to spread gloom and doom, because this is a problem we can solve. We can fix this. It doesn't have to happen. Recently reported in the science media, I mentioned to you that Bill Napier and Victor Klube have been drawing attention to the torrid meteor stream since the 1980s, and they've been ignored. And people have said, no, nonsense, it couldn't possibly be. But now, swarm of near-Earth comets linked to recent ice giant breakup. Study of prior research suggests there is a swarm of large asteroids hidden in the torrid complex. Torrid complex, smoking gun. These are all major scientific papers. And as I said in Magicians of the Gods in 2015, it's quite a different matter with the torrids. Klube, Napier, Hoyle and Wickersham have demonstrated the torrid stream is filled to overflowing with other much more massive material, sometimes visible, sometimes shrouded in clouds of dust, and all of it flying through space at tremendous velocities and intersecting with the Earth's orbit twice a year, regular as clockwork, year in, year out. There's the paper in Planetary and Space Science identifying the smoking gun of the torrid complex. This is a paper published this year. The evidence is just coming out more and more and more. The high percentage of active asteroids gives support to the hypothesis of a catastrophe that took place during the Upper Paleolithic, in other words, the Younger Dryas cataclysm, when a large short-period comet arriving in the inner solar system from the Kuiper Belt experienced, starting from 20,000 years ago, a series of fragmentations that produced the present 2P Encke comet, together with a large number of other members of the torrid complex. This is a brand new paper. These guys who were ridiculed for years, just like Alvarez, father and son, are being vindicated by new evidence. And it's high time we sat up and paid attention. So, there's Newsweek. Asteroids, they can be stopped, but somebody has to pay. And that's the point I'm coming to. This does not have to be doom and gloom. We have the technology. We have the resources. We have the scientific ability to sweep the torrid meteor stream clear. We can move at... Big commercial interests are looking right now at mining asteroids. You know, some asteroids are made of solid gold. Mining asteroids is a very attractive commercial proposition. Saving the Earth from absolute destruction doesn't seem to be such an attractive proposition. It's just a matter of priorities. Do we choose to spend trillions of dollars on military and warfare and murdering one another as nations and peoples all around the world, while the cosmos looks down on us, looks down on a civilization that no longer wears its prosperity with moderation? Are we going to just stand by and let it happen again? Or are we going to use our skills and abilities to reduce that danger or even eliminate it completely? It could be done. It's well within the bounds of present science. It's just a matter of choice. It would be a project that would require the cooperation of nations all around the world. It would be a wonderful project, actually. Since the nations of the Earth are so constantly in arms against one another, what a wonderful project it would be to get into cooperation, pool resources, pool knowledge, pool money, and make the Earth's cosmic environment safe for our children and our grandchildren and future generations for thousands of years to come. It's just a choice. We can do it if we want to do it. It's just a choice. So that's San Francisco, lit up by night. The one thing about living in a in a big city is you can't see the night sky, really. The light pollution just shuts the stars out from view. We almost forget we're living in a cosmos and in a cosmic environment. But if you look down from a NASA satellite at Earth, you can see something interesting. You can see that certain parts of the world are lit up very bright. There's Europe, lit up like a string of jewels. But down below the Mediterranean, there's sub-Saharan Africa. There's the Sahara Desert in Africa. It's almost completely dark because there's nobody there burning electricity. It's not casting up that light to the sky. Down in the Namibian desert in the southwest of Africa, almost completely dark. Not so much electricity being burned there. We take this brilliant electric light that we produce as a sort of symbol and sign of the advancement of our civilization. We can light up the night skies. Go to the other side of the world, North America, the top there, again, brilliantly lit. But go down to South America, and the Amazon jungle is almost totally dark because there's no electricity in the Amazon jungle. And again, we tend to take this as a sign of, in our arrogance and our hubris, we take this as a sign of our advancement and of the limitations of other cultures. But we have to ask ourselves, if an event like the Younger Dryas impacts were to happen again in our time, who would survive? Would it be us in the advanced technological civilizations? Very few of us have survival skills. Few do, Joe Rogan does, but very few of us have survival skills. And we're not psychically prepared for the whole infrastructure that we've created just to be swept out from under our feet overnight. I think there would be massive psychological trauma. I think Western civilization would fall apart in about 2 weeks in such a situation. But who would survive would be the meek of the earth. It would be the hunter-gatherers in the Amazon rainforest, the hunter-gatherers in the Namibian desert. They would survive. They're masters of survival. That's what they do. They survive. Such an event would leave them still existing and our so-called great civilization completely gone. And it would be them, those surviving hunter-gatherers, who would pass down the memory to the future. And I'll come on in another talk as to how that memory might be represented. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you very much.